Zara had always wondered about the strange vibrations that shook her bedroom walls at night. Living in the small town of Riverside, nestled against the towering Mount Kethera, she thought it was just the wind playing tricks through the mountain caves. But tonight, something felt different. 300 years ago, when the world was a darker place filled with creatures from nightmares, humanity made a desperate bargain. They offered their most precious treasures to the last of the great dragons in exchange for protection. Darius, the Ancient One, accepted this sacred duty. He became the guardian of the Sundering Gate, a mystical portal that kept the Shadow Realm separated from Earth. For centuries, the people honored their agreement. Every full moon, they would bring offerings, golden coins, precious gems, and most importantly, food to sustain the mighty protector. Darius grew strong on their generosity, his emerald scales gleaming like polished armor, his eyes burning bright as stars. The shadow creatures beyond the gate trembled at his presence, never daring to test his strength. But time has a way of eroding even the strongest memories. Generations passed, and the stories of dragons became fairy tales. The monthly ceremonies stopped. The path to the sacred cave grew wild with thorns and forgotten weeds. Children laughed at the old songs their grandparents sang about the dragon protector, calling them silly superstitions. Deep within Mount Kethera, in a cavern so vast it could hold an entire football stadium, Darius waited. And waited. His once brilliant scales had dulled to the color of old pewter. His magnificent wings, which once stretched wide enough to cast shadows over entire valleys, now hung limp against his sides. His golden eyes had faded to pale amber, struggling to stay open as weakness consumed his ancient body. Yet still he guarded. Even as hunger gnawed at his massive frame, even as his strength ebbed like water through cracked stone, he maintained his watch over the Sundering Gate. The swirling portal behind him pulsed with an evil purple light, constantly trying to widen itself, constantly probing for weakness in its guardian. Darius could feel them on the other side, thousands of shadow beasts pressing against the dimensional barrier. They whispered promises of destruction, painting pictures of a world consumed by darkness. They could sense his growing weakness, like sharks smelling blood in the water. Each day they grew bolder, testing the edges of the portal, searching for any crack in his defense. The dragon's breathing had become labored, each exhale creating small puffs of steam in the cold mountain air. His great heart, which once beat with the power of thunder, now struggled with irregular rhythms. Ancient magic still flowed through his veins, but even that was beginning to flicker like a candle in the wind. Above him, the people of Riverside went about their daily lives. Children walked to school along paths that meandered through meadows kept safe by a dying guardian they never knew existed. Families gathered for dinner around tables laden with food, while below their feet, the protector of their world grew weaker with each passing hour. Darius remembered the taste of fresh bread, the sweetness of honey cakes, the satisfaction of a full belly that allowed him to channel his power without reservation. Those memories felt like dreams now, distant and fading. His last meal had been nearly 2 decades ago, when old Thomas the baker accidentally dropped a basket of rolls near the cave entrance. The dragon had summoned just enough strength to retrieve them, savoring each crumb as if it were the finest delicacy. The Sundering Gate grew more restless as Darius weakened. Strange sounds echoed from its depths, chittering, growling, the scrape of claws against dimensional walls. Sometimes dark tentacles would probe through the smallest gaps, only to be weakly swatted away by the dragon's tail. But each defensive movement cost him precious energy he could barely spare. In his dreams, Darius saw visions of the world as it would become if he failed. Cities engulfed in shadow, people fleeing in terror from creatures that fed on fear itself. The Shadow Realm would spread like spilled ink across reality, turning Earth into another conquered world in their endless expansion. But what kept him fighting wasn't just duty or ancient magic, it was love. Love for the humans who had once trusted him, who had sung songs in his honor, who had brought their children to meet the great protector in ceremonies of mutual respect. Even though they had forgotten him, he could never forget them. The dragon's eyes closed briefly, conserving what little energy remained. Tomorrow would bring another day of vigilant watching, another day of growing hunger, another day of holding back the darkness through sheer force of will. He wondered how much longer he could endure, but pushed the thought away. Above ground, 10-year-old Zara finished her homework and prepared for bed, completely unaware that her peaceful world hung by the thinnest of threads. Zara had always been the kind of kid who couldn't resist a mystery. While other children her age were content playing video games or watching cartoons, she found herself drawn to the unexplored corners of the world around her. Today, that curiosity would change everything. It started with Pepper, her pet rabbit, a fluffy white bundle of energy that had somehow learned to open his cage latch. Zara discovered the empty cage during breakfast and immediately knew where to look. Peppa had a habit of escaping to the wild berry bushes that grew near the old mining trails on Mount Kethera. "Mom, I'm going to find Peppa," Zara called out, grabbing her purple backpack and stuffing it with her leftover turkey sandwich from lunch. Her mother, Maya, looked up from her morning coffee with concern. "Stay on the main paths, sweetheart. And be back before dark." Zara nodded, already racing toward the door. She had explored these trails dozens of times, but always stopped at the wooden signs that marked the boundaries of the old mining area. Today felt different though. Today, adventure was calling. The morning sun filtered through the pine trees as Zara followed Peppa's tiny paw prints in the soft earth. The tracks led her higher up the mountain than she had ever ventured, past the familiar landmarks and into territory that felt ancient and untouched. "Peppa! Come here, boy," she called, her voice echoing off the rocky cliff faces. A faint rustling sound came from somewhere up ahead, near what looked like a crack in the mountain wall. Zara pushed through a curtain of hanging moss and found herself staring at an opening she had never noticed before. It was narrow, just wide enough for a person to squeeze through, but it seemed to go deep into the mountain. Peppa's white fur was visible about 20 feet inside the cave, his pink nose twitching as he explored this new territory. Zara pulled out her phone and turned on the flashlight. The cave walls were smooth and curved, almost as if they had been carved rather than formed naturally. Strange symbols were etched into the stone, not like any writing she had seen in school, but somehow familiar, like half-remembered dreams. "This is so cool," she whispered to herself, following Peppa deeper into the mountain. The passage sloped downward, winding back and forth like a giant snake. Her footsteps echoed strangely, creating sounds that seemed to bounce forever before fading away. The air grew warmer as she descended, which struck her as odd since caves were supposed to be cold. After what felt like an hour of walking, Zara emerged into something that took her breath away. The cavern was enormous, bigger than her school gymnasium, bigger than the community center, bigger than anything she could have imagined existing inside a mountain. Glowing crystals embedded in the ceiling provided a soft, blue-white light that made everything look magical. But it wasn't the size of the cave or even the beautiful crystals that made Zara gasp. It was the creature lying in the center of the vast space. At first, she thought it might be some kind of statue or rock formation. But then she noticed the slow, rhythmic movement that could only be breathing. The creature was massive, easily the length of a school bus, with scales that caught the crystal light and reflected it in dull, pewter-colored patterns. A dragon. An actual, real dragon. Most kids would have screamed and run. But Zara had always been different. Instead of fear, she felt an overwhelming sense of wonder mixed with something else, sadness. Even from across the cavern, she could see that something was wrong. The dragon's breathing seemed labored, and its great head rested heavily on the stone floor as if it was too tired to lift it. Peppa had apparently decided this sleeping giant was harmless, because the little rabbit was now calmly nibbling on some kind of glowing moss that grew near the dragon's front claws. Zara took a careful step forward, then another. Her sneakers made soft squeaking sounds on the smooth stone, but the dragon didn't stir. She could see now that its eyes were closed, though whether it was sleeping or something worse, she couldn't tell. "Hello," she whispered, her voice barely audible in the vast space. One golden eye opened slowly, focusing on her with an expression of surprise so human-like that Zara felt her heart skip. The eye was beautiful but dim, like a candle flame that was running out of wax. For a long moment, they stared at each other, a 10-year-old girl with a purple backpack and an ancient dragon who had been forgotten by the world. Neither moved, neither spoke, but something passed between them that was deeper than words. Finally, Zara smiled and sat down cross-legged on the cave floor, just like she did during story time at school. She pulled her turkey sandwich from her backpack and unwrapped it carefully. "You look hungry," she said simply, breaking the sandwich in half and holding out the larger piece toward the magnificent creature. The dragon blinked slowly, and for the first time in decades, something like hope flickered in those ancient golden eyes. Darius had lived for over 1,000 years, but he had never experienced anything quite like this moment. A small human child sat before him, offering half of her sandwich with the kind of genuine kindness he thought had vanished from the world centuries ago. His massive head moved slowly, carefully, as he lowered it toward Zara's outstretched hand. The turkey sandwich looked impossibly tiny against his enormous snout, but when he gently took it with the very tip of his mouth, it was the most delicious thing he had tasted in decades. "My name is Zara," the girl said, taking a bite of her own half. "What's yours?" The dragon's voice, when it finally came, sounded like distant thunder rolling across mountains. "I am Darius." The words came out rusty from years of silence. guardian of this sacred place. Zara's eyes widened with excitement rather than fear. You can talk. This is amazing. Are you really a dragon? I mean, I know you look like one, but I thought dragons were just in stories. A sound escaped from Darius that might have been laughter, though it had been so long since he had laughed that he wasn't entirely sure. Stories have a way of being more real than people think, little one. From that day forward, Zara began visiting the cave every afternoon after school. She would tell her parents she was going to explore or collect interesting rocks, which wasn't entirely a lie. She had certainly found the most interesting thing in the entire mountain. Each visit, she brought something to share: leftover pizza from the school cafeteria, apples from the tree in her backyard, sometimes even homemade cookies her grandmother Maya had taught her to bake. The food was helping, she could see that. Darius's scales were beginning to show hints of their former luster, and his golden eyes were growing brighter each day. But more than the physical nourishment, it was their conversations that seemed to truly revive the ancient guardian. Zara would sit cross-legged on her favorite flat rock while Darius arranged himself in a comfortable coil, his great head resting at her eye level so they could talk properly. "Tell me about the old days," Zara would say, and Darius would share stories that made her imagination soar. He told her about the time when dragons and humans worked together, building cities that reached toward the clouds and developing technologies that seemed like magic. He described great libraries where both species shared knowledge, and festivals where dragon fire would light up the night sky in celebration of their friendship. What happened? Zara asked one rainy afternoon, sharing a peanut butter sandwich with her enormous friend. Why did people forget about dragons? Darius's expression grew sad. Fear, little one. And time. When the shadow creatures first appeared, many humans blamed us dragons for opening doorways between worlds. They didn't understand that we were trying to protect them, not harm them. Gradually, the old agreements were forgotten, and we became nothing more than myths. Zara frowned. That's not fair. You've been protecting everyone this whole time, and nobody even knows. It is the way of guardians, Darius replied gently. We protect not for gratitude, but because it is right. As the weeks passed, Zara noticed that the cave itself seemed to be changing. The glowing crystals burned brighter, and she could swear that some of the ancient symbols on the walls were beginning to glow with a soft, warm light. Even Pepper seemed to enjoy their visits, often napping contentedly between Darius's front claws while Zara and the dragon talked. But with Darius's returning strength came an unexpected consequence. Deep within the mountain, behind the massive stone archway that Zara had assumed was just another cave formation, something stirred. The Sundering Gate had remained stable for centuries, its purple energies contained by the ancient magic that bound Darius to his duty. But now, as the dragon's power grew stronger through friendship and proper nourishment, the gate began to respond to his renewed vitality. It started as just a subtle change in the air pressure that made Zara's ears pop. Then came strange sounds, whispers that seemed to come from nowhere, skittering noises like enormous insects moving in the darkness, and occasionally, a low growling that made her skin crawl. Darius noticed her discomfort during one of their afternoon visits. Something is troubling you, young friend. Zara shifted uncomfortably on her rock. Those sounds, they've been getting louder. And sometimes I feel like something is watching us from that dark archway over there. The dragon's golden eyes flicked toward the Sundering Gate, and for the first time since they had met, Zara saw genuine worry cross his ancient features. I had hoped, Darius murmured, more to himself than to her, that my recovery would not awaken them so quickly. Awaken who? Zara asked, though she wasn't entirely sure she wanted to know the answer. Darius looked at her with an expression that seemed to carry the weight of centuries. The reason I am here, little guardian. The reason I have watched and waited all these years. There are things beyond that gate, creatures of shadow and hunger that would turn your beautiful world into something dark and terrible. As if responding to his words, a sound echoed from the depths of the archway, a sound like breaking glass mixed with the cry of something that had never known light. Zara moved closer to Darius, and the great dragon instinctively curved his neck around her in a protective gesture. Don't worry, she said, surprising herself with how steady her voice sounded. Whatever's in there, we'll figure it out together. For the first time in 3 centuries, Darius realized he was no longer alone in his vigil. But he also knew that the greatest test of their newfound friendship was about to begin. The first sign that something was seriously wrong came on a Tuesday night when Mrs. Chen's grocery store windows shattered for no apparent reason. She had been closing up shop when every piece of glass in the building exploded outward, covering the sidewalk in glittering fragments. The strange part wasn't just the broken glass, it was the way the pieces seemed to move on their own, forming weird patterns before finally going still. By Thursday, 3 more businesses on Main Street had experienced similar incidents. The hardware store, the bakery, and even the old library had their windows blown out by some invisible force. The townspeople of Riverside were starting to get nervous. Zara noticed the changes too, but in ways the adults couldn't see. During her daily visits to Darius's cave, she observed that the ancient symbols on the walls were now glowing almost constantly. The air itself felt different, thicker somehow, like trying to breathe through honey. And those sounds from the dark archway were getting louder and more frequent. "It's getting worse, isn't it?" she asked Darius during one of their afternoon meetings, sharing a bag of trail mix her mom had packed for her rock-collecting expedition. The great dragon's golden eyes were troubled as he gazed toward the sundering gate. "I'm afraid so, little friend. As my strength returns through your kindness, the barriers between worlds become more unstable. The shadow creatures can sense my renewed power, and they're testing the boundaries more aggressively." That evening, Zara sat at the dinner table with her parents, trying to act normal while her mind raced with worry. Her father, Devon, was reading the local newspaper with a deep frown. "Listen to this, Maya," he said to her mother. 5 more incidents today. The police chief is calling it unexplained structural failures, but people are starting to talk about moving away from the mountain. Maya shook her head while serving Zara another helping of mashed potatoes. "This has been our home for generations. Whatever's causing these problems, we'll figure it out." Zara pushed her food around her plate, her appetite gone. If only she could tell them the truth, that their town's protector was recovering from centuries of neglect, and that recovery was accidentally stirring up something dangerous. But who would believe a 10-year-old girl claiming to be friends with a dragon? The next morning brought news that made Zara's stomach drop. Keisha Williams from down the street came running to their house, her face pale with fear. "Maya, you need to come see this," she said breathlessly. "Something happened to the Morrison family's house last night." They all rushed down the street to find the Morrisons' 2-story home looking like it had been hit by a tornado, but only on the inside. Every piece of furniture was overturned, family photos were scattered across the floor, and there were strange scorch marks on the walls that didn't look like they came from any normal fire. The weirdest part was that the Morrisons themselves had no memory of what happened. They had simply woken up to find their home destroyed. "We need to call the state police," Devon said, pulling out his phone. "This is beyond anything our local officers can handle." That afternoon, Zara practically ran up the mountain trail, her heart pounding with worry. She burst into Darius's cave to find the dragon pacing back and forth, his massive form moving with agitated energy. "They are breaking through," he said without preamble. "Small tears in reality that seal themselves quickly, but each breach allows a shadow creature to slip into your world for a few moments." Zara sat down heavily on her usual rock. The Morrison house. That was them, wasn't it? Darius nodded gravely. "Shadow creatures feed on fear and chaos. They can't survive long in your realm, the light and warmth are toxic to them, but they can cause significant damage in the short time they are here." "So what do we do?" Zara asked, though she was afraid she already knew the answer. The ancient dragon was quiet for a long moment, his golden eyes reflecting centuries of wisdom and pain. "There may be only one solution, little guardian. I must return to my weakened state. If I allow the hunger to consume me again, if I stop accepting your wonderful gifts of food and friendship, then my power will diminish and the gate will stabilize." "No." Zara jumped to her feet, her voice echoing through the vast cavern. "There has to be another way. You were dying before I found you. I won't let you go back to that." Darius lowered his great head until it was level with hers. "Your friendship has been the greatest gift of my long life, Zara. But I cannot be responsible for harm coming to your people. I am a guardian, it is my duty to protect, even if that protection requires sacrifice." Tears began to stream down Zara's face. "But you'll die if you go back to starving. And then who will guard the gate? What happens when you're too weak to hold them back anymore?" The dragon had no answer for that, and they both knew it. The shadow creatures would eventually break through whether Darius was strong or weak, the only question was whether it would happen sooner or later. Outside the cave, the sun was setting over Riverside, where families were having dinner and children were doing homework, completely unaware that their safety hung in the balance between a dying dragon and a 10-year-old girl who refused to give up on her friend. As if summoned by their despair, another sound echoed from the sundering gate, longer and louder than before, filled with a hunger that had waited centuries to be satisfied. Time was running out, and Zara knew that both she and Darius were going to have to make choices that would change everything. The night everything changed started with the loudest sound Riverside had ever heard. It was 3 a.m. when a crack like thunder split the air, followed by a purple light that blazed across the sky bright enough to wake every person in town. Windows rattled, car alarms went off, and dogs howled in terror at something their instincts told them was deeply wrong. Zara jolted awake in her bed, her heart racing. She knew immediately what had happened. The sundering gate had finally given way. Down in the cave, Darius roared in anguish as creatures of living shadow poured through the massive tear in reality. His weakened state had made him too slow to seal the breach, and now dozens of nightmare beings were spilling into the human world like ink spreading through water. These weren't the small scout creatures that had been slipping through tiny cracks. These were full-sized shadow beasts, things that looked like wolves made of smoke and hatred, giant spiders with too many legs and eyes like burning coals, and writhing masses of darkness that defied description. They scattered in all directions, eager to taste a world they had been denied for centuries. Zara threw on her clothes and raced toward the mountain, but she wasn't the only one heading that way. Half the town was already gathering in the community center, talking frantically about the strange light and the terrible sounds echoing from Mount Kethera. Mayor Rodriguez was trying to calm everyone down, but his voice was shaking. "I've called the National Guard and the state emergency services. Until they arrive, everyone needs to stay indoors and dash." His words were cut off as something slammed into the building's roof. Through the windows, they could see a massive shape moving against the stars, something with wings and claws that definitely wasn't supposed to exist. That's when Zara made the biggest decision of her 10-year-old life. "Everyone, please listen to me," she shouted, climbing onto a chair in the middle of the panicked crowd. Her father Devon spotted her immediately. "Zara, what are you doing here? You should be at home where it's safe." "Dad, nowhere is safe right now," Zara said, her voice carrying with surprising authority. "But I know how to fix this. I know what's happening and why." The room gradually quieted as people turned to look at the small girl standing on the chair. Mrs. Chen, still bandaged from her window incident, spoke first. "Sweetheart, what could you possibly know about all this?" Zara took a deep breath. "There's a dragon living in Mount Kethera. His name is Darius, and he's been protecting our town, protecting all of us, for 300 years. But people forgot about him, and he's been starving all this time, getting weaker and weaker." A few people started to laugh nervously, but Zara continued with such sincerity that the laughter quickly died away. "The things attacking us tonight, they're from another dimension, another world where everything is dark and horrible. Darius has been guarding a gateway to keep them out, but he's too weak to hold them back anymore. He needs our help. He needs what our great-great-grandparents used to give him, food and friendship, and the knowledge that we appreciate what he's doing for us." Mr. Thompson, the school principal, stepped forward gently. "Zara, honey, you've been under a lot of stress with all these strange events. Sometimes our imagination can dash." His words were interrupted by a crash that shook the entire building. Through the windows, they could see one of the shadow creatures prowling around the parking lot, its red eyes scanning for prey. "I can prove it," Zara said desperately. "Follow me up the mountain. Let me show you Darius, and he can stop all of this. But only if we work together, the way people used to." Outside, another roar echoed across the valley, but this one was different. This was the sound of a dragon in battle, fighting with everything he had left to protect the town that had forgotten him. Maya looked at her daughter with a mixture of pride and terror. "If there's even a chance you're right, we have to try." And so, in the middle of the night, with shadow creatures stalking through their streets, nearly the entire population of Riverside followed a 10-year-old girl up a mountain trail toward a cave most of them didn't even know existed. When they reached the vast cavern and saw Darius for the first time, magnificent even in his weakened state, breathing heavily from his battle with the shadow beasts, the silence was deafening. "His real," whispered Mrs. Chen. "His beautiful," added Mr. Thompson. Darius looked at the crowd of humans with surprise and something that might have been hope. "Little guardian," he said to Zara, his voice carrying clearly through the cavern, "what have you done?" "What should have been done a long time ago," Zara replied. She turned to face her neighbors, friends, and family. "This is Darius. He's the reason we've been safe all these years. And now it's time for us to take care of him the way he's taken care of us." Mayor Rodriguez stepped forward, his official training kicking in even in this impossible situation. "What do you need from us?" "Food," Darius said simply. "Friendship. And perhaps most importantly, the knowledge that my sacrifice has meaning." Within hours, the people of Riverside had organized the most unusual community effort in the town's history. Families brought casseroles, restaurants donated their entire inventories, and even the local farmers drove up truckloads of fresh produce. As Darius ate his first real meal in decades, his strength returned rapidly. With renewed power flowing through his ancient body, the dragon approached the still-open sundering gate. Zara walked beside him, her small hand resting on his massive foreleg, while the entire town watched in awe. Together, dragon and child pressed their hands against the dimensional tear. Darius's magic, strengthened by genuine human partnership after centuries of isolation, sealed the gateway with bonds stronger than ever before. The shadow creatures that had already escaped dissolved like smoke in the morning sun, unable to survive in a world protected by the combined will of humans and dragons working as one. The old covenant is renewed, Darius declared, his voice ringing with power and joy. But this time, it will not be forgotten. From that night forward, Riverside became the first town in the modern world to openly host a dragon guardian. Children would visit Darius for story time, families would bring him meals, and the old songs about dragon protectors were taught in school once again. And Zara, who had bridged two worlds with nothing more than a sandwich and the courage to be kind, became known as the first speaker, the human voice in a partnership that would inspire the world to remember that the greatest strength comes not from standing alone, but from building bridges across the differences that seem to divide us. The shadow creatures would return someday, but when they did, they would find a world ready for them, a world where humans and dragons stood together, stronger than either could ever be alone.